Welcome to Snow Talk, the podcast of the Snow and Ice Management Association. We bring you trends, stories, news, and personalities that are shaping the professional snow and ice management industry. I'm your host, Martin Tirado of SIMA. This season of Snow Talk is sponsored by Western Snowplows and Fisher Engineering. Thank you for your ongoing support. Today, we're going to learn about a couple of topics, both related to growth and professional development. They're going to be growing yourself and enabling the growth of the people you work with. Joining us today is Evan Tachoir. He's a founder and lead trainer of Jack of All People Trades. He specializes in talent development, employee engagement, and HR consulting. Something else I want to also mention about Evan is not only has he been a member of SIMA for a long time, but certainly an attendee of our Snow and Ice Symposium. And you come from a unique background within the industry. You did work previously for a large snow and ice management company based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So you know the ins and outs, the good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent of how to build others, build teams, and help not only our companies and teams grow, but then how does that help even us grow? And looking forward to your unique perspective on this. So Evan, going to get right into it and start talking snow with you. We often hear that when they realize that they need to grow, they realize they can't do it all. So what do they need to do? What's the first step and help that you would give them to build a great team? It's kind of like, hey, where do you start? I know there's, the first recognition is I understand there's a problem or there's an issue we need to address. What's your first step? Talk to me about that, Evan.
Yeah. So I think I'll, thank you for the intro. I'll jump into that. I think two things I would say on the first step that come to mind is number one, kind of that not only admitting you have the problem, but being willing as an owner to do that work. Usually I'm talking more to the owner founder perspective of, you've had the snow company, maybe you've had your crew that you hired of either people or some people that were referred, but now you're starting to scale and you realize I can't do all the billing and dispatch and lead the crew in the field and sell and be the operations manager. I need some other people to do this. So really at that point, not only realizing that pain, but also realizing with delegation, at first, a lot of people don't delegate because they say, well, nobody's going to do it as good as me. Yeah, that's obvious. I hear Thane Isaacs in the back of my head right now being like, yeah, that's obvious with a couple emphatics behind it, because you've been doing it for 5+ years or 10+ years, 20, however long it's been. So realizing that there is going to be that learning curve and being willing to be patient and ride out that process as you grow, because I think some people think, oh, I'll hire somebody, they'll hit the ground running and that's going to solve my problem. And that's not really how it works a lot of times. I mean, you might get that ace hire once in a while that really jumps in and really just blows you up, but there is going to be that learning curve to your company and culture. So I think number one is expecting that. And then number two is realizing your own strengths and building that team under you. So for example, if you're that owner who, let's say you're very strong in operations, you are good operating, and also what you enjoy too. You enjoy snow operations, but you don't enjoy selling. You don't enjoy relating to customers. That's probably where you're going to want to start looking, is having people that can support you with those different skill sets. Or if you're somebody that's maybe more administrative, runs the business well on paper, but you're not as good in the field or you don't enjoy that element as much, then maybe you're looking for a stronger operations leader. So I think knowing your strengths and then knowing where to look and how to put those, positions in place. And it's a lot of work that goes into it, because there's really, what are you looking for? What are the main things the role has to do? Things like job descriptions, recruiting, which I could go down all those rabbit holes. But before I even get to that, I think it's number one, being willing to, set up that structure. And with that, you have to also, I think as an owner at that point, transition from being always working in the business to now you're working on the business. So for example, if you're that operations leader who hires somebody as a sales director or sales manager, they report to you, you have your overall goals, but you can't be in every RFP that they're doing. You can't be in every meeting. You can't be in every customer conversation, every customer email. You have to set up a structure where they can handle things and then know where the escalation point is to you, and also know what the reporting back point is to you, because there does have to be accountability, but really forming that. And that's where a lot of my work comes in, because that stuff sounds easy to say, but even as I'm saying it, I'm almost, I don't want to say hesitating, but I'm almost saying like, ooh, there's a lot that goes, like my brain's firing, like, there's a lot that goes into that. It's a lot easier said than done. And I confess it is. That's why that people work and that organizational development work is so important, because I like Scott Lisak's quote on it where he says, effort doesn't scale, systems do. So it's really about not only getting the people, but also what's the system once they come in. So again, back to that ops sales example, what is the system then for sales as far as when they outreach, when they escalate to you, how you work together from a sales and operations side to determine capacity? All those things need to be worked out. But yeah, too long didn't read. Being willing to delegate and let go, and then also figuring out where your strengths are as a leader and an owner, and hiring to supplement that.
Yeah, that's great. Several topics there. Let's unpack a couple of them.
Yeah.
One, delegation. There's another organizational leader that I respect highly, and we were talking about delegation once. And he had mentioned to me, he's like, you have to be comfortable with someone doing it in a different way than how you would do it. You just have to clarify what the expectation or the outcome is afterwards. You want, and just be comfortable with doing that. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to be, again, that delegate comfortably, because you don't want to it's not always going to be done the way that you do it. And in some ways, that's where creativity comes into place too. And he would address this too. Creativity, innovations. Someone come up with a different way to do it that could be better, more efficient, could incorporate other teams, other objectives. That's very powerful. And then another part of delegation, this comes from Steve Wheatcroft from within the snow and ice industry. He's an industry legend, I believe. He talked one time, I heard him speak, he called it the boomerang effect. And that's if you're not clear on what that final outcome or expectation, what you're trying to do, the boomerang, you throw it out in the air. If you're not clear on where it comes back and it hits you. You don't want the boomerang to hit you in the head, and because that's painful. And so as long as it won't do that, as long as you clarify what that expectation or outcome is at the end, and then let that boomerang fly.
Yeah, definitely. So I think, a lot of good points there. Steve's absolutely on point about clarifying the end outcome and being really clear. That's one of the things I teach in some leadership development is accountability, because I think a lot of people think they are very clear and maybe either don't paint that picture of what success looks like, or on the other hand, also, give too many details to the point where as adults, here's a big takeaway I'd say, if you take nothing else from this podcast, when you're developing people as adult learners, we learn best in small bites of learning that we can apply on the job. So for example, if your thought is as an owner, well, I'm just going to have one big meeting before the snow season, if you do snow and landscape, and tell these people everything about snow, they're probably not going to retain a lot of that from just one meeting. But if you break that up over starting now at your weekly meetings, having little snow tips, having things you send out, giving them resources for independent development, putting them on like an individual development plan that they can talk about with their direct manager, then you can start getting those principles in, piece by piece. And that can also help with delegation too, is, painting that picture clear. But the one model I like of delegation is the 5 levels. I read an article probably about 3 years ago on it, and it really kind of gave me a framework. So it's basically level 1 is do exactly as I say. So if you tell me, Martin, if you tell me as, you're my boss, hey, Evan, I need you to do this exactly this way. Don't deviate. It's like, or follow this work instruction or this procedure to the letter. That's one level. And then the next level is, basically research and report. I hope I'm getting these all right, but there's articles out there on it if I don't. So there's next level is kind of, research and report. So, research on this report, I'm going to make the decision. Then there's research and recommend, which is, okay, we're working on a problem, let's say as an operations leader, hey, I need you to organize, here's the sites we have, what makes sense to group them by regions together for routing purposes. And I research, but I also recommend to you, hey, I think based on distance and travel, this makes the most sense. And then there's the do and report back, which is, that's where you're more putting it on the person. So again, if let's say you're that ops director, and I've been using that ops with a salesperson reporting to you. So I'm your sales manager reporting to you. It's like, hey, get those RFPs out and just let me know that they're out and when the response date is. I don't need to check with you on what I put in the RFP. I just need to get it out. And then the last one is, do and no need to report back. So that would be like the little things, like I don't need to report back to you on my daily CRM activities. You know what I mean? As long as the end outcome's there, it's there. So I think that's a good model to have. And that's a good model if you're looking to say, like, where are you at? And even with owners, ask yourself, or leaders, any leaders, not just owners, where are you at comfort level wise with each of those and why? And how can you move maybe to that next level of comfort? Or is there a reason a certain task shouldn't move to that next level?
Yeah, fantastic tips. I never heard of those levels before, but that makes a lot of sense. One of the other things you mentioned in your earlier statement talked on strengths, and let's call it, Strengths Finder. That's a Gallup thing. DISC. Recently, I've been engaged in an entity. It's called Dignify, and it's kind of a similar concept. I actually sometimes I even go back to the 5 love languages, and that was based on a marital, or couples counseling. But you can use that; it's expanded to all of your relationships. So I think they're all good, and I think there's good points to take kind of from all of them. Which ones have you kind of utilized? You enjoyed? You kind of have people go through Strengths Finder when you can. Your teams go through that, and what's your experience with that?
Sure. So I'm definitely a big fan of, assessments, because I think they give you a unbiased view. And, the one thing I would say to any assessments before I talk about the ones I've worked with is two things. Number one, they're not a label. I think some people can get stuck on that. Like, well, I'm not exactly what this says. It's more of you discuss how does it show up for you at work. There might be things because of your work experience, life experience, that maybe you have developed in this area that you're not as change resistant as your DISC report might say. And then number two, just that back to that consistent application over time. If you're going to do a DISC or Strength Finder or anything, I think it's best used. Where I see a lot of companies make mistakes is they'll engage a consultant like me. We'll do reports. We'll do like a meeting. And then, the reports kind of get saved on a drive somewhere, put in a drawer somewhere, and you don't have that application. But if you have like little icebreakers that you can do, even in a morning huddle for a field crew, like, hey, based on our strengths today, what's going to be a communication challenge, or how can the team help you, or how can your strength help you, or what do you appreciate about someone else's strength style? So I've used DISC, Clifton Strengths. I'm certified in DISC. I've used Clifton Strengths. I've used Predictive Index as well, which is, I like that because it's not only the personality assessment, which I believe you can still do for free on their site, but they actually have a hiring tool that you can build with it where it actually maps the personality styles to like functions of a job. So you can see, is this job like a sales job, more extroverted, consultative selling, versus if you have, say, an accounting back office job that might be more introverted but more detail oriented, and you can kind of see where candidates match on that. So I've used those three. I'm a little bit familiar with the Dignify. I haven't used it as much, but I would say Clifton Strength Predictive Index is good if you're going to use it with the hiring. I think Clifton Strengths is very thorough. I like it for that. It does the assessments longer and it does take longer time. I like DISC if you're in an environment like a lot of snow landscape, outdoor companies are, where you don't have a lot of time. DISC can be good because I've done DISC assessments. It can be done in 15 minutes and give you a very thorough report with some takeaways that you can talk about. So I think it's really based on the company needs, but just like you have to look at it like any kind of workout equipment you buy at home. You can buy the, Bowflex home gym and all the best equipment. If it sits in the basement and gathers dust and you don't do anything with it, you're not going to get the benefit of it. So think about that with any kind of development like that. Like, what are you going to do with it consistently?
Yeah, that's great. All those are great resources and references. Hey, I want to talk a bit about appreciating our people. And I'm going to pull something that's off of, we had a speaker on giftology. And there's a book, and I just saw you had a recent social media post on that. And one of the things I've actually been delving into giftology a bit, not extensively, but one of the things I've learned about it is what it really is it's about appreciation and connecting with people. The gift part of it is just one of the methods that but it's you're using that as a pathway to appreciate and connect deeper with people that you want to have good relationships with, and you appreciate what they do. What do you what do you do or recommend how to when you appreciate people who are working in a company, and what do they like to be rewarded, so that they feel connected not only to again to you or someone as a leader in the company, but just to the company in the bigger picture of the mission.
Yeah. So a couple things I can talk about with that is number one, kind of like you said with giftology, I'm just getting into reading it myself, but with any kind of things like, whether it's gifts, recognition, it's got to be genuine and consistent. Anything that's not genuine and consistent, people got BS meters and they can smell it. You know what I mean?
Right.
If you are like, oh, I'm going to give my employees, these big gifts on, their anniversary date, but you're consistently talking down to them, or expectations aren't clear, or they don't have the resources to do the job consistently, and that foundation's not there, that one time, gift that you're throwing at them, or, oh, I'll just throw a raise at someone who's dissatisfied, that's not going to hold people long term. So it's the consistency and the genuineness that really matters. But, Gallup's research that you reference, I'm a big Gallup Q12 fan with employee engagement, but I really try to apply it is, one of the things they say drives engagement is in the past 7 days, I've received recognition for good work. And that doesn't have to be anything financial or tangible. It can simply be the kind words, an email, a text. If you're driving by a job site and you see it's clear, texting the crew, hey, just drove by, this mall, see everything is great, sidewalks look clear. Or, hey, just talk to this customer. They passed this, they said they were very satisfied. Thank you so much. I know this has been a tough storm. You've been really fighting. I appreciate you. So really those appreciations, making sure in the moment, with appreciation, making sure it's specific, not just a good job, but hey, what did you do a good job on and how did it impact the business? And then also with that, making sure it's consistent. I always say, put a reminder in your calendar to do recognition. And that's not to make, some people have said, well, does that make it robotic? I say more it's a flag, because it's not necessarily saying you have to recognize that day, but it starts getting it in your mind to do it. Because then as you even start, I do that for myself. And as I know it's coming up, then it gets me in the mindset, hey, wait, I just had a good meeting with somebody about, data that's going to help me work smarter. I need to recognize them for that. So I think recognition, and kind of like you and I had talked about this offline, you really have to build your trust bucket with your people consistently, because in those tough moments, if you're relying on how do I just motivate or push people when it gets tough, and you haven't built trust and rapport beforehand, it's going to be a lot tougher than if you have. So if you've been, let's use snow for an example, as you've been leading up to the season, if you've been recognizing people for getting the equipment ready, getting it cleaned, testing it every month to make sure it still turns on, you don't have electrical issues, then when you get to that storm, you're going to have a lot more trust when you call that mechanic halfway across town and say, hey, this is broken. I need you ASAP. We're getting killed over here. If they have that recognition and trust and rapport, they're more likely to be like, hey, no problem. On my way. I got you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Trust has been written about, spoken about, by leaders in a lot of ways. Like, what are the ways that you build trust? And there's a lot of ways to do it, but you mentioned, I think, a big one of them, and that's consistency. Consistency builds trust.
Yes.
So does, reliability. Isn't that part of consistency as well too? But what are some other things that help, like you say, even a team? How does a team kind of help build trust amongst each other?
Yeah, so I'll go little bit of a shameless self promo, but I actually did a 4-part series on my podcast, Net Gain on Employee Engagement, which I drop a lot of this, but I'll drop some basics of it here. It really starts with the foundation of number one, I know what's expected of me at work. So kind of like you said, that reliability. I know what site I'm supposed to be at. I know what my responsibilities are on that site, or in storms, if you're supporting on the back end, I know what I'm supposed to be supporting. We've talked about the plan. I know what the plan is. I know if the plan changes, how it's communicated. And then number two, I have the materials, resources and equipment needed to do my job. So obviously in snow, that gets into, having good equipment, making sure your supplies are all there, your de-icers easily accessible, even simple things like if you're on, let's say, a hospital site and you have a, old school tarp setup where it's just like, a bunch of bricks and salt under a tarp that people got to take rocks off of, that takes time. And that's just a little bit of a, kind of slows you down and a little bit of a demotivator versus if you have something that's like a drive-in shed where you just open the door, you load up and you go. And, you can just shut and lock that door. It keeps you moving. It might not seem like a big thing, but it really does make a difference. And then also, I think a part of materials needed to do the job is information. So that's a big thing for leadership and everybody to make sure your people have the information needed to do their job. I know, for example, when I was working in snow, one of the snafus I ran into was I was responsible for schedule and training. And I remember we had self-performed training. I was waiting to get all the routes and all the sites finalized so we could get things scheduled, especially for salt drivers because they had several sites in a route. So we get everything finalized and scheduled. And then there were a couple changes made I wasn't aware of. And it was like, that was a little bit of a demotivator because it's like, wait a second, I already had these scheduled and, people were setting time out of their day to come do training on these sites. So, and it wasn't an intentional oversight or intentional thing. It was just a oversight made quickly. But the takeaway from that is really what are you doing, making decisions and thinking about who do your decisions affect and who do you need to communicate downhill to because, they rely on or they're affected by what decision you make. So I think that expectations and materials and info to do the job is like the basics.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's great. One thing too is like we always talk about, hey, these are all the great positive things that can happen. Let's talk about when there's some the tough ones. There's some dissension. Maybe it's a lack of trust. Some things that kind of just aren't going right. The team you have, an operations team, whatever team it is, that just isn't working well together for a variety of reasons. Where do you start? And I know I started as kind of like first is like gathering information. Let's talk to each one individually, and then you kind of do an assessment. But I was kind of looking at like when you do that assessment, then kind of where do you go from there? You try to be an intermediary, or how do you address that? But I'd like to hear what are some of your thoughts you have on that when you have some challenging situations.
Yeah. So first of all, I'll try to address with big level principles just because so many situations can be so different and have so many. But I think the first thing is you have to lean into it. You can't avoid it. You can't put your head in the sand. So that's the number one principle. You can't just say, oh, well, you know what? We're almost through the season or whatever. We need people. These guys don't quite get along. We'll just kind of get through it. You have to lean into it. A kind of model I like for difficult conversations is, you want to number one, lean into the conflict. And, that means, like you said, figure out, talk to the people involved, figure out what's going on. Is it a people conflict? Is it a not understanding a process? Is it an equipment conflict, customer, whatever it is? And then when you're leaning in, I think the biggest thing, and I still need to grow in this area myself, so I'm preaching to myself as much as anybody, is start with you don't know anything. And that doesn't mean you're incompetent, but that means I need to keep an open mind and I need to hear what's going on. Because a lot of times you can bias yourself if you're not careful. Oh, I've seen this before, therefore this is that. And that can actually get you to the wrong conclusion if you're not careful. So really going in and leaning. And then, obviously, keeping quiet, letting other people talk, because when you're having a people conflict, if you're doing most of the talking, and this also applies with interviews, not to tangent there, but if you're trying to find out information and you're doing the most talking, you're not finding out the information. I mean, that would almost be like you as a podcast host or me, myself, if we had a guest on to talk about a specific area and we talked for 95% of the podcast, that probably wouldn't be effective because you don't learn from the guest. So I think those three, and then also being willing to take action. One thing I'll share, just as one example that came to mind is I know in snow say, I've had people bail on me for, you know, an extra dollar an hour down the road or something, or, because they got another job. I mean, here's the thing, there's a lot unpredictable, but I believe in building the strong system, communicating well, and knowing that in a seasonal business, you're going to lose some people, but you want to do the best to retain. And you also want to play the long game too. Like if you have good people and they just happen to get called back to work because, they're working in whatever job full time and they plow for you on the side, keep those relationships strong, because when you have a winter like this that comes along, yeah, maybe they haven't been available the last 2 years to you, but now they are available because you've had more heavier snow. So you want to play that long game and really keep your pool strong as well.
Yeah, good. Yeah, there's a human nature thing, and I've also learned this over time, is we do avoid conflict. It's just a natural thing. Maybe there's a small percentage of people out there that just thrive off of it, but if you do, you're pretty rare, actually. Most of us, we don't like conflict. We like to avoid it. And so that's typically what happens. It's like, oh, maybe this issue will sort itself out. and I've been guilty of this as much as probably anybody. And the reality is in most cases they don't. And then it ends up being, that's this kind of like, don't avoid it. And then it ends up kind of being like, oh, is this still happening? What can be changed? What can be adjusted? You do that listening, but then you have to, at some point, it's like, we're going to take some action. We're going to take some action here, and in a productive and positive manner, where these are the steps that we need to do as a team to all help each other and get better. And it takes some time to get by, but I think if you listen to people, then come up with some constructive, reasons, kind of like, the whys, answer the question of why are we doing this way, or making this decision, then I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, definitely. I like the one rule director I used to work with said, no pocket vetoes, meaning that you don't, let's say we're in a meeting and, we had the conflict, you listened to everybody, and then you said, okay, based on the information, here's how we're going to proceed forward, or we discuss it and this is what we decide. What you don't do is then go out of that meeting and say, man, I don't really agree with what Martin's saying here. Yeah, I don't either. Like none of that. And I think that's a trust thing. Or to caveat that, I do think it's okay and healthy to have disagreement, to say, personally, I don't see it this way. However, if that's the decision, I'll back it. Especially as strong leaders that have trust, I feel like you can say that. And I've said that to supervisors. I've said that, hey, you know what? I feel like I'd be more comfortable doing it this way, but we will do it this way to move it forward. And also be humble enough to admit if you're wrong. There's times where I've kind of locked down on a course of action I've been overrode on, and what I was overrode on was the right thing to do and paid off. And I've had to come back and say, you know what, I see the value in that. So I think being able to be humble enough to admit you're wrong, and also see, don't get caught on the little things too. Like what are the big goals? And that's where I think having core values that you stand by, so if you say from a snow company standpoint that we are, good to the environment and good on service. So that means, no matter what, we're going to make sure we're using brine, or we're using chemicals that are, not as much, sodium chloride to put in the environment. We're calibrating in a way that works well. Even little things, you might have little disagreements on how you do different sites, but you always point back to that core value, good to the environment, good on service. And then same thing with that also, what are the big level company goals? So I would say as leaders, if you don't have, I know in EOS, they call them rocks, if you don't have those rocks, and then, cascading goals or cascading rocks that support. So again, back to feel like this op sales thing is kind of like the theme we keep going with. But if you're that owner who's strong in operations, you've set your goals that you want to expand into, industrial and warehouse snow removal. Well, then your sales manager, to support that goal, they need to have a revenue goal or a, site goal to support getting into that vertical specifically. So if they're out here selling gas stations, that's not supporting your goal of getting into, the big industrial. So I think that's how you can kind of align on that, because you're going to have disagreements with, how you do things. People are going to see things differently. People are going to prioritize things differently. And that's where I'll say, I know I've kind of given a lot of coaching to owners, but here's where I'll definitely say I empathize with you. And even you, Martin, as a, leader of an organization, is you have a lot of people with not conflicting, but different goals and focuses that, it's like, oh, we should do this to prioritize members. No, we should do this for business development. No, we should do this for legislation and outreach and education. And everybody wants to go 100% if they're really engaged. And as a senior leader, you have to kind of balance, all right, where do we put the priority at different times? And how do we make sure that, for example, with an organization, sure, you can buy and put in and implement all the best technology, but is that too much for the team to use and understand? And does that suck too many resources away from equipment? Or do you put so much in equipment that you don't train people? So I say that to say I empathize with senior leaders, whether it's you leading SIMA or others, because you do have a lot to balance in that. And I think that's where those high level goals come in place. But, it is a constant, chess match. And I always say Snow, and I think leading an organization is like, it's like playing chess with an ever changing board. I mean, I'm not that great at chess myself, but I can only imagine if it was like, I think I have a good setup and all of a sudden, oh, by the way, your knight doesn't exist anymore, and 3 of these pawns turned into queens. Like, yikes.
Yeah, I'm not good at chess at all either. I find it really interesting. I don't know. Put it this way, it's fun that people can beat me very easily, which is, I just find it interesting. Like, it actually takes some work to get good at that. But I see what you mean. It's a strategy kind of comes into play there. But I do want to just reiterate one of the initial statements you had there, because this is I would say a guiding principle of organizational management, and that's in private and meetings, you can disagree and not agree, but when you go out to, whether it's your constituencies as members, whether your customers, you have to be in alignment. We'll be like, yeah, we talked it out. This is the direction we're going to go. And we're going in that direction regardless of one person's personal opinion or not. Where you really can get some pushback, and where there's I shouldn't say pushback, dysfunction is when someone then goes to whoever it is that your stakeholder is and says, oh, you know what? Yeah, I agree with you. I didn't agree with that decision either. I would have done something completely different. Now you're undermining the integrity of the team, undermining the integrity of the organization or the company. And it's just kind of something to be mindful. And it really is I would say again, an organizational guideline that's been implemented in a lot of successful organizations, companies, associations in that regard. So good point that you brought up there. Yeah, I did want to talk about, I just found this intriguing in some of our prior conversations. It's Gallup Q12 question 10 for people. I'm not an expert on this by any means at all, but that's why I like talking to you about it. But that one is this: I have a best friend at work. Can you talk to us a little bit about like the importance of why someone why it's important to have a best friend at work?
Yeah, so I think it's important first to start defining that, how Gallup defines it. So, for those not familiar, I know we've referenced it earlier, but the Q12 is Gallup's employee engagement survey that they've done over decades in multiple industries. So the too long didn't read, it works. If you work with it, it works. But one of the things they measure is the statement, I have a best friend at work, on like a strongly disagree to strongly agree scale. And how they define that, it's not necessarily thinking of it as like your best friend in life, but the example that I heard it best is, if you think about it, if a friend calls you, you're about to lay down for bed, you've put your, night retainer in, brushed your teeth, and a friend calls, your acquaintance calls, you might be like, oh, I'll call them back in the morning. Versus if a best friend calls and it's like, hey, I'm stuck on the side of the road, can you come get me? You're probably like, hold on, I'm gonna put my shoes on, I'll be there in 10 minutes, and you're gonna go get dressed. So it's really about, do you have those people at work that you've built bonds and rapport with to the point you're gonna show up? And where I think that's needed, and not even valuable, needed in snow removal, is you have so much unpredictability in events. So where have you built rapport with people to the point where, your machines broke down and, there's nothing you can do, or is that mechanic going to come across town for you and prioritize you? Or if you're struggling, is somebody going to say, hey, you know what? We don't have to open this back lot till later. We're going to drive our loader down the road and we're going to help you because, you're a machine down or you're a person behind right now. And really how you build that is, again, we talked about earlier, that's part of the trust bucket I talked about earlier, is you've got to do that consistently over time. So a very good application, I believe this will be dropping before the symposium, so sometime summerish. So now when you have spring, if you didn't have a postseason event to appreciate your team, like a postseason cookout, definitely have one. Include your seasonal operators in that. Invite them, invite their families, because that gives you time to just sit down, build relationships, and build rapport. And what you don't want to do, you don't want to force relationships. You don't want to say, okay, you guys, we're going to stick you in a room until you get along. But you want to create opportunities for relationships. So maybe that's even once a month or every other week, if you're a small crew, like a extended huddle Friday. So maybe instead of the 10-minute huddle where you give the instructions and the basics for the day, maybe you bring in some coffee and donuts once a month and we say, hey, we're going to, pour some coffee. We're going to have donuts before we go, or protein bars or fruit if you're trying to be healthier. And then we're going to just talk for 15 minutes or give you guys, that 20 minutes, half hour time just to catch up. How's things going? And, hey, I know you're coaching baseball. How's your son's team doing? I see the Penguins made the playoffs for the first time in 4 years. How are you feeling about that? That's a personal one for me. I'm feeling good about it. But, whatever it is, just to build those rapport moments, because those rapport moments really are going to then show up when there's, that conflict or that driving thing, or someone's exhausted. You have that empathy and rapport built where, if I know that, I think I can think of many good people in the industry that I've built with that, if I was in the field with and they said, hey man, I'm struggling over here, I would be like, all right, I'm going to try to get to you. Or I'll use an example of when I was in snow, when I was dispatching, recruiting, project managing for Self-Perform. I know we had a bad storm that came through, went a little bit overperformed what it was expected to, and had a couple no-shows, in our one region where John Macharko, a good friend of mine who I worked with, was managing. And I knew for him, I was like, I'm going through every contact I have. Like, I'm turning every stone over for this guy until I get people there. And I mean, I was calling people that I had worked with us a year ago, 2 years ago. I was calling people that I'd interviewed previously, like, anything I could do to get people. We did eventually get it, staffed and get some good people there. But I did that because I had that rapport with him, and he and we had hung out. We had relationship time. We had talked, on the phone. So that time does pay off. So I would say, find some tangible ways to put it in, both end of season appreciation and consistency throughout the summer into the fall.
Yeah, fantastic. You segue nicely there into the summer snow and ice symposium. And actually, one thing I noticed is where behind you now you have some name badges from SIMA symposiums past. That's a good. Thanks for showcasing those there on the screen. And then wanted to just it's a little bit of a change of direction, but I think this is actually good for the personal. Let's just talk. We talk a lot about team growth and growing other people. Let's talk about our own personal growth. And we're less than 2 months away from the Snow and Ice Symposium. We're going to have about 2,000 people or more in Cincinnati, Ohio, June 23rd through 26th. At one time, you were a first-time attendee of the symposium. And I'll admit, I've attended some large conferences on my own as well, too. And it can be really intimidating. And one thing I keep reiterating is what's easy is just staying home and just kind of going through what you normally do week to week. That's easy. What's difficult is getting out of your comfort zone, attending an educational conference or trade show. And even that's beyond the symposium. There's other, outdoor industry related conferences that I think are really do a great job. And you go to those and you want to learn, you want to grow, whether yourself, your own network, your professional network, and of course your business. What are some things that you would do? You're a first time attendee. What are some advices that you could say take away from attendees that go to a conference, particularly ones of this size where you're not going to know the vast majority of people?
Yeah, so I'll answer that kind of two ways. I'll answer for overall, and then I'll kind of hit the first time attendees specifically. So I think overall, and this goes for both attendees and also leadership sending attendees, and this is anything. So obviously, we're here with Simus to talk in the symposium, but if you're going to sending people to other shows, this applies as well. Is number one, again, back to the company goals. What are your company goals, and what are some things you've been struggling with or initiatives you want to implement? So start thinking about that, and then look at the symposium, presentations. What are the different tracks? What are the courses? Who's at the trade show? And really prioritize. I'm not saying you have to have a super detailed plan, but maybe even start, like, let's say you have not sure where to start. Pick three. Pick maybe two courses and somebody to talk to at the trade show, or two people to visit at the trade show. If you're, thinking about Brine, you want to visit a couple of the vendors. Pick, three things that you're going to prioritize, or maybe it's a conversation with someone is going to be there that you're going to have lunch session with or dinner with some night. Pick three things and really charge each person with those three things. And then when they get back, have them actually, take notes from that. So like, let's say, for example, I'm charged with going in and talking to, Hilltip about calibration on sprayers, and getting information. So I visit them and get that information. Then I come back and then have that time for them to report back both to you as an owner and also to the team about what they found and what they recommend. So that way you get the maximum value out of that. So I'd say, beforehand, think about company goals, prep, send each person with three things, whether it's people to talk to, classes to attend, to get takeaways, and then talk about those as you get back. So I would say for the first time attendees specifically, again, that same framework can apply. But even if your ownership is not as plugged in to do that, there's no saying you can't do that yourself. So if you're thinking, well, my owner's sending me, but they're just too busy, they don't really care, like, think about your goals then. So you can apply that same framework yourself. And then I think one thing to remember is, with asking questions, everybody's scared of asking the quote unquote dumb question, but, I don't think there are stupid questions. I think there's always good perspective. And here's the thing, everybody, I think almost anybody in snow, I've heard it on different podcasts from different conversations. Every site's different, every storm's different. So with that, everyone's experience is different. So there's a likelihood of, that what you ask to somebody might be perspective others haven't heard or might validate something they're doing. So don't be afraid to ask. And then also kind of set yourself up for success in how you move best. So I'm a little biased to this because I'm an extrovert. So it was probably easier for me. Like something like the trade show is kind of built for someone like me because in disc, I'm a high personality. So it's like, oh, a bunch of people to meet and talk to. Like, yes, sign me up. But I do recognize for some people, you might be more introverted and that might be more, a strain to just go talk to everybody. So in that case, maybe think about being targeted. Like, who do you really want to talk to? And if you're going with someone from the company or you're going with someone from the industry, use them and kind of lean on them for introductions. Like maybe, and I'll volunteer myself for an example. If anybody's hearing this and there's a vendor that you're wanting to meet, maybe you're going first time, feel free to reach out to me, Evan at jackofallpeopletrades.com. I'm happy to make an introduction if I know it. I'll even say if I'm there, I'm willing to, walk with you to the table and introduce you, even if I don't know them, so find people. I'll be that for somebody, but if, ask somebody at your company to be that for you as well, and maybe introduce you if you are more introverted. And then I'd say too, if you're introverted and you need more away time to kind of recoup your energy, kind of look at the schedule and take that time. You know what I mean? It's not saying you don't like people, but maybe that drains your energy. So maybe you need some, sit away time where you just make notes or you just get into whatever you're doing and recharge a little bit. So I hope that gives some guidance and some principles. But yeah, I think definitely back to, again, how we started the conversation way at the beginning was, adults learn best when we apply at work. So if you're not planning on what you're taking, both educationally, trade show wise, and then applying those takeaways, then, you may have just burned your money or had a hangout session at best. But if you go back and apply, and nothing wrong with rapport building there, but if you go back and apply it, you're going to get that return on investment. So I hope that helps somebody.
Yeah, good stuff. Entirely agree. Well, one thing to build on that too is even some of those things, the takeaways could just be again a new contact or a relationship. Hey, me and this person or a couple people, we're going to keep in touch because they do their operations this way, or they have their contract structure this way, or they're implementing more a mix of brine plus rock salt, or they're implementing a new software, whatever that is. It's like, hey, we're kind of struggling with the same thing. Do you mind if let's just check in every so often over the next year? So I like to kind of tell you about what's working on our end, and maybe we can share some what's working on your end and what's not.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great one too. But as we wrap up here, I'm going to throw this out there. I see you kind of looking through your back wall there, Evan, and you're good at this as an extrovert. I'm curious, what's your why? I see that right there. What's my why? What's yours?
Yeah. So my why is really about building win-win workplaces. So what that is I want to build places where people know their strengths, work in them, and thrive and enjoy work, and enjoy life. And with that, company goals are exceeded because you've got people in place that are thriving. I don't believe that, it's healthy to just say, oh, we just drive people based on results and metrics and you get it done no matter what. I don't like that win-lose. I also don't like the win-lose where it's like, oh, we cater to people, but we don't really hold accountable. I think the win-win, I was sharing this with a leader at my day job the other day. I said, I respect you because I know you're a tough leader, but you're not a tough leader in the fact that you beat people down. You're a tough leader that makes me, if we're on a boat together, I want to row with you because at the end, I know we're going to get out. We're going to be what I don't want to be with you is I don't want to be the person who's not sweaty and didn't put the effort in and is looking at you and everyone else. I want to be the person who I'm as exhausted as you are, but we look at each other and we're like, we did that together. So that's kind of the workplace I want to build, is that thriving place. And that's come out of a lot of my career lows, especially because I hit some, just to keep it very basic, some career lows, burnout. I was actually it was in a payroll benefits role that I took just to avoid job searching, failed at miserably, was on a performance improvement plan, dealing with undiagnosed anxiety. I had resigned there just to avoid being fired and was searching to get back into recruiting and talent management. This was in early 2019. That's when I started with the snow company just because they needed a recruiter. I walked in the door the first day, honestly, questioning if I even still had it professionally. Like if you'd have told me that first day we'd be sitting here having this conversation, I'd have told you were nuts. You know what I mean? But through just being able to find my strengths and find that my strengths are on the people side, are on relationships, are on recruiting, and that I can build through feedback, that started to re-energize me to the point where I'm like, okay, I can do this. I can make a difference. And that really, really launched my why to, be something. So I hope that wasn't too long of a story of it, but that's really where my why comes from.
No, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for opening up about that. Yeah, there's one other thing that listeners can take away from this podcast, I'd say, is ask yourself, what's your why? And if you already know what it is, keep clarifying it with yourself and applying it. If you don't, that's okay too. Try to ask yourself some of those probing questions to understand what your why is. And it can change over time too.
Yeah.
And there's different things that become different priorities based on your life experiences. And it's good to explore those and expand and identify what those are. So something to think about for listeners is better understand your why. But Evan, thank you so much for your insight today. Look forward to seeing you this summer at the symposium, and appreciate everything that you do.
Thank you, Martin. I appreciate it.